Will you be eating the bugs? You will eat the bugs and be happy. I thought I would make a video discussing this because it's disgusting, and it totally goes against what people want. It goes against nature, really. And I thought it'd be worth discussing. You know, back in my urban farmer days, when that's what I was doing a lot of, running the farm, in the off season I would travel to conferences. I spoke at all kinds of conferences that were all about climate change and sustainable development. And these conferences were totally inhabited by globalists. And most of them, I can honestly say, well, at least in my opinion, that they have good intentions. Most of these people in the environmentalist, which is, you know, really the same circle as the globalist movement, they have good intentions. They just don't really know that they're being useful idiots. And I know a lot of people that are really part of that, but they're just interested in advancing their own careers, really. Like they have these virtue signals that they put out there, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to advance their careers as consultants or speakers or whatever. They're not necessarily thinking that they're enslaving the world. They don't really understand the big picture because they've been told by all of their sort of left-wing pundits that any questioning of the narrative means you're a right-wing conspiracist or something like that. And so there's a real lack of critical thought in that space. And so I thought I would bring some critical thought to the debate today. So there's this massive push to fund these insect farms. In Canada, they're putting millions of dollars into this, and each province is doing their part. And the whole reason, at least on the press release version of the narrative, that they say this is important is because there's always this half-truth that's used in the environmentalist communities, and that animal protein is unsustainable. They always say that. Of course, whenever they're criticizing anything about animal farming, it's always the large industrial CAFOs, it's kind of a straw man, because that's not how I eat meat. That's not how anybody I know who has half a brain on their head, or at least understands the dangers to your health and the environment, to eating that kind of meat. But they always go at this thing full force. You know, a lot of the sort of mainstream vegans make these same arguments, but they just criticize the worst examples of it. And so the insect farming thing is the same, is that, well, if we're going to feed the world with one thing, it's always that, right? How do you feed the world? It's a logical fallacy to turn something into, well, how does this apply to the world? It's like, well, it doesn't have to apply to the world. But that's sort of their argument, is that it's unsustainable for people to eat protein around the world based on the current model of large-scale industrial farming. But they never really talk about holistic land management, regenerative agriculture, things like this that are real solutions. And they like to just kind of go at that straw man. And so now it's this big push to eat insects, which is absolutely disgusting, and and nobody's really asking for it, which is funny. Nobody's really sitting there in the free market and saying, you know, I want to eat bugs. This is all just contrived, forced narratives from the government. Just like how the BC government here in Canada is now funding, literally taking people's tax dollars to fund the mutilation of children, which is transgender surgery. And at the same time, they're pushing to ban conversion therapy. So, I mean, talk about a complete contradiction. So one is, you're born a boy, but you think you're a girl, so the government will pay you to mutilate yourself and cut your testicles off. You'll never actually be a girl. It's physically impossible. You can't change your biological sex. You just mutilate yourself, and you have a disgusting hole in you that you have to stick this thing in, and you're a pharmaceutical customer for life. And that's really what that whole thing is about. It's just big pharma business that will have customers for life. And yeah, and then they ban conversion therapy. And it's like, aren't they the same thing, really logically? You're born one way and you want to be something else. So how is it that you can fund one and then try to ban the other? It doesn't make any sense. But don't ask for sense or logical consistency when it comes to globalist narratives. And so they want to push insect agriculture. So they're putting all kinds of money at this. And it's just another obvious globalist scam. Nobody's asking for this, right? The free market is not demanding insect-based agriculture. It's only coming out of government subsidies. Just like, drag queen pedophile time in public libraries around the world is funded by governments all the time. Nobody in the free market is asking for this. Maybe the odd social justice warrior is really begging to put their son or daughter on the lap of a pedophile, but most people with common sense are not into this. And that's why, and I don't want to derail the subject, but it does illustrate a point in that if you go online and you look at these videos of drag queen pedophile time, or you look at videos about insect farming and things like this, they often turn the comments off because people reject it. People are not into it. And so they need to use the state to force through an idea. Just like you saw with the scamdemic over the last 2 years, just like you see with every lame narrative they try to push. But the thing that's so funny about the insect agriculture is that, well, for one, it's disgusting. And again, nobody's asking for it. But it's another way that they can turn a product into a commodity that is completely processed. So there isn't a movement in the insect agriculture world of small farms, resilient farms, farmers that are family-based business. This is all big agribusiness. It's all heavily processed. Basically, the way they're going to make or try to get North Americans to eat this garbage is to hide it in foods. And they're already doing this. So be careful. If you're eating a lot of processed food, you got to look at the ingredients because they're already sneaking this stuff in all kinds of products. But the propaganda is amazing. They've got, a whole slew of celebrities like Nicole Kidman that, Vanity Fair put this video out with Nicole Kidman. I'm not going to put the clips in here just for copyright. It'll get this video censored. But it's an absolute onslaught of propaganda and government funding because the free market is not asking for this. And this is what fundamentally comes down to anything that you see the globalist narrative push, is that it's never asked for. It's totally contrived and totally forced. It's like when governments spend money on failed programs, they just ask for more funding. But in the free market, when ideas are tried and they're failed, they switch gears. And this is the insanity of government, and also the insanity of fractional reserve and fiat money, is that ideologues can infinitely fund ridiculous ideas that go against everything you know to be true, and they can just keep pushing it. Whereas in the free market, it doesn't happen that way because you have to deploy resources to an idea or a project or a business, and if it isn't working, you have to stop because you can't just infinitely fund it forever. It's going to fail. You're going to go broke. You're going to lose everything. But this is what the state does, and this is why their hands are all over this thing. The New World Order wants you to do everything against your God-given nature. So that's why they want you cutting off your wee-wee and pretending to be something you're not. That's why they want you eating highly processed, genetically modified food. That's why they want you eating bugs. That's why they want you worshiping false idols and worshiping false virtue. This thing that the radical left does, which we call virtue signaling, in that you think you're virtuous because you're gay. You think you're virtuous because you're trans. These are not virtues. These are not things that you did or accomplished. They want you worshiping the fact that you're not white, celebrating the fact that you're not white. They want you, the original sin in the sort of leftist woke religion is privilege. And the problem with it is that there's no redemption. At least in real religions, there's redemption. Whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, there's redemption in those religions. And so if there's original sin, there's some kind of redemption at the end. But not in wokeism. And wokeism is essentially 2 + 2 is 5. It's the science versus science. It's to get you to do anything that goes against your nature. And in my opinion, there is a very higher purpose with all this, in that this is a spiritual warfare to get you to do everything against your own nature voluntarily. And that's how this whole game works. That's why people who took the shot, if they would look and read a little bit, it isn't hard to find that it might not be the best decision for you. But that's wokeism. How can you have all of the information out there in the public about what the shots did and the Pfizer reports and all these things that came out? And I'm being a little bit careful the way I talk about this, just so this video doesn't get taken down. But how can you have, where all the information's out there, it's all in the open, but people still went along with it? That's the point, is they want you participating in a lie that you know is a lie, but then you went along to get along. Because it's one thing to tell a lie and repeat it if you believe it. It's a whole other thing to tell a lie and repeat it when you know it's a lie, because now you're complicit. And that's, the bugs fit into that, the injections fit into that, the smart cities fit into that. All of this massive propaganda and information warfare that has gone full operational in the last 2 years, that we can see, is fundamentally about that, getting you to go against your own goodwill. And so if they can get you to admit 2 + 2 is 5, just like in 1984, that's really what matters. It doesn't matter if you believe it. It's actually better if you don't believe it, because now you're morally culpable. You have now engaged in a lie and you know it. And this goes against God's law. And this is what all of this woke stuff is fundamentally all about on the deep level. On the front end of it, it's a depopulation agenda. I mean, the woke stuff is the sort of cultural arm of the depopulation agenda. The ejections are the physical direct arm, the forefront of it, not to mention all kinds of other poisons and things that people put in themselves voluntarily all the time. But it's all part of the same thing, to get you to go against what you know is true. So if they can get you to admit it, then they got you. And my belief and understanding of how Western law really works, and when it comes down to the laws of equity, equity doesn't aid a volunteer. So if you voluntarily did it, well, then the only person who's actually liable is you. And this is how all these psychopaths get away with the things that they do, is that you actually do them to yourselves. But their propaganda campaigns are relentless, and they're subversive, and they're everywhere. The propaganda is absolutely insane today, how far it's gone, and I think there's a reason for that. And as I said, the reason is because they need you to do it. They need you to do it to yourself. You need to eat the bugs, and you know it's not right. You know it's disgusting. Who would eat this? Like this picture here, bugs at least in their whole form, but who thinks that is edible in North America, in Western society? Who would eat that? Nobody. Nobody is lining up to eat this. I'm not saying there aren't people that do. I mean, and we know that bugs have been consumed in Asian culture for a very long time. But that's not what I'm really talking about. Because the way that they're being presented in North America is to be fully processed. So it's black soldier fly larvae or crickets, and they're being processed down into a powder. The thing you got to really think about it, it doesn't take a big special peer-reviewed scientific article to figure this out, is where in nature do people eat powders? Where? Nowhere. Where in nature do animals or other living beings eat powders? It doesn't exist. And so whether you're eating bugs or highly processed GMO soy or corn, it's not that much different in the sense that it's so processed that your gut can't digest this food in the same way. And the toxins, because it's a powder, are going to go into your body that much quicker. It's poison. It's poison. Processed food that's made from powders is poison. And bugs essentially are no different. I just often think that the whole thing with bugs is that it's just another globalist joke. They're just sitting there laughing at how stupid people are to go along with this. But people do. People go along with all of it. I mean, look at the last 2 years. How many people do you know that went along with this whole thing? And they just went along to get along. And it's kind of sad, isn't it? I mean, just think about how ridiculous it is that when the government would come out and say something, there's a press release and then there's an actual statute, and they're two often very different things. But people they don't even read the press release. They just read the headline of the article. That's how people read today. It's all sensationalized, and social media has done a really good job of obfuscation, because you'll often read these salacious articles by, left-wing rags like The Guardian or even the New York Times, and they'll make these big, bold claims in a headline, and then the first paragraph will say some stuff, but then you actually read the whole article, and then you find, well, you guys just contradicted yourself, but nobody gets that far because people just read the headline. And that's the madness of where we are today. Is it's backwards world. It's all inversions, and those inversions go against everything that we know in our hearts. But the thing is, they don't want you to listen to that. They want you to trust the experts. They want you to trust the science, right? Because the science is actually technically very different than science. Because if you trust science, you trust the scientific method. And the scientific method kind of goes like this. Somebody comes up with a hypothesis, an idea on how things are, and then you use experiments to disprove the hypothesis. And the great thing about that method is it actually gets rid of bias, because then you can destroy your bias. You can just look at the actual science. What did the results tell me? But the science is a different thing. The science is to basically trust everything the experts say. And the experts will tell you anything that their funding pays for. And that's really where it's at. It's just propaganda. And our society has very quickly become technocratic. And I think the last 2 years were really the part of what happened over the last 2 years was it was a rollout to bring in technocracy. Because when we first had some inkling of democracy where politicians would campaign on ideas that were popular, now technocrats that are basically coming from the same revolving door of CEO to bureaucrat come in, and they just tell politicians how it's going to go. Fauci and in Canada, this crazy tranny named Theresa Tam would just tell you what's what. And all these people look like ghouls. The one thing that's so easy about today, and I believe we are in a time of revelation or a great revealing, is that you can see it in all of their faces. Just look at the faces of some of these ghouls. They look soulless. They look completely empty and hollow and evil. So it's quite easy, actually. Once your eyes are somewhat open, it's really easy to spot the propaganda. It's really easy to see where things are going and how you orientate yourself in this madness. And that's actually a big part of what gives me hope with where all this is going, is once you understand some principles, everything is so obvious. And at the same time, it's overwhelming, because once you see how obvious it is, you see how entrenched it is. in the public school system, the woke propaganda is everywhere. Even in places you'd be surprised. Even in some of these small towns around the areas that I live in are full of it. This woke stuff is everywhere. And the woke stuff is very important, because if you can get people to admit that men can have babies, you just got them to admit that 2 + 2 is 5. And again, it doesn't matter if they actually believe it. The important thing is that they repeat the narrative. And in a way, it's actually better for the establishment if you don't believe it and you repeat it, because then you're culpable in a lie. That's this game. That's what it's all about. I'm going to leave this one there. If you guys like this video, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Check out my site, fromthefield.tv. It's where I post all my vlogs and the vast majority of all my content. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.